What's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast. I am Connor O'Gara. Will is battling a sinus infection, so last minute scratch. Hope Will is doing better. Will was at the SEC baseball tournament this past weekend. I'm not saying that he got sick directly from that, but just saying he might have gotten sick directly from that. Will is going to be back next week. We have a great pod coming up today. We've got everyone in college football seemingly mad at one another, yelling at each other on the internet in May. What else is new? Greg Sankey's playoff comments definitely sparked that. So we're going to dig into that. Michael Katz is going to join us in a bit to talk Lane, an introduction to Austin Simmons, a little Pete Golding, and more stuff with him. And then we're going to close with some Lad of the Week. But first, as we have been doing for the past couple months here, today's pod is brought to you by Dabble. If you are watching these NBA playoffs, surely you would like to have something on the line. Little daily fantasy action has been a lot of fun, I know, for a lot of people that have been just getting into that space and just being able to kind of map out, all right, what are these props looking like in a given day? And Dabble is going to be the best place to do that. It is one of the newest and best apps in the DFS space. They've wasted no time making a name for themselves. Dabble's social function is second to none, and they offer a wide variety of sports for making picks, including, as I mentioned, NBA playoffs. We've got MLB going on as well. If you're like, hey, this dude's going yard today, I would like to have some action against the Rockies. Dabble, yeah, that's the place to do it. Use that promo code SDS2 when you sign up today. Receive $25 in bonus cash, no deposit required. Again, that's promo code SDS2, $25 in bonus cash, courtesy of the good folks at Dabble. All right, so I wanted to map out what is fair and what is not fair with Greg Sankey's playoff comments, because if you don't like Greg Sankey, you're just going to assume that everything is unfair about what he said. And I've kind of had mixed reactions to the things that he said. A weird never have I ever for me is that I've never gone to SEC meetings in Destin. I've never gone to the spring meetings. And there's probably a few reasons for that, one of which being Matt Hayes would usually be there for us. Matt Hayes is now in his role at USA Today. Unfortunately, he is no longer my teammate, but for years, Matt would go a little bit closer to him in Jacksonville than it is to me in Orlando. And it's not really the content king that SEC Media Days is, and a lot of the meaningful developments that happen at SEC spring meetings kind of come out naturally from press conferences and stuff like that. So it's a lot of what you will see is already going to be out there on Twitter. So not to get too, into the weeds here, but even a 6-hour drive is a little bit, like a 6-hour drive for me is not always worth it to be able to do something like that, because it's an awkward flight given where it is in the state. Nobody cares about this. You don't care about this. But I was not at SEC meetings, so I did not see all these events unfold in person. We went to the beach as a family on Memorial Day, as many people do on Memorial Day. So, and by the way, shout out to my guy, Drew, and his family who have a condo on New Smyrna Beach. We were able to spend the day there. He has 4 kids. Claire was having just a great old time being able to play at the beach. And it might have been the first Memorial Day, outside of Claire being born, Memorial Day weekend 2 years ago. It might have been the first Memorial Day where I truly tried to put work on the back burner. I said, I'm going to get all my content knocked out early, beforehand, whatever. So I knew SEC Media Days were going to be starting, or not SEC Media Days, SEC meetings were going to be starting in the beginning of the week. And I knew that coming off this lovely trip to the beach, get the grill going at night, great day overall, I knew that there was a good possibility that I was going to open up my phone whenever I sat down and got back to work things, that I was going to be opening my phone up to some chaos. And buddy, it was World War III. Greg Sankey had everyone in a tizzy over his comments related to playoff expansion. And to be clear, I get why everyone felt so strongly about a lot of the things that he said, as someone who has essentially taken on a Darth Vader type role in college football. In case you missed what Greg Sankey said, here's the rundown. He's an advocate for the 16-team playoff beginning in 2026. It would have the Big Ten and SEC getting 4 automatic bids. The Big 12 and ACC would get 2 automatic bids. 1 bid would go to the highest ranked Group of 5 conference champ, and then you'd have the 3 at-large bids. We know that the Big Ten and SEC want this, and everyone else does not. And more on that in a little bit here. But we know that they have until December 1st of this year to decide what the 2026 playoff format will be. So there's clearly a sense of urgency from all parties to be able to figure out what in the world are we going to have for the rest of the decade. And none of that was necessarily news, right? We knew that coming into this. What was newsworthy was the tone and a few of the other points that Sankey made. Sankey said that he didn't need to be lectured about the good of the game and that he didn't lecture others about the good of the game. He referenced coordinated press conferences that had been released discussing that by, well, basically you can read between the lines here. The subtext was the ACC and Big 12 had released these coordinated efforts to act like they were talking about the good of the game with all of their decision making. We had this come out after the straight seeding was announced last week, that we were going to be making that switch after just 1 year of having the 4 highest ranked conference champs get the buys. Instead, we're now just doing straight seeding. So even though it is going to be this year the 4 highest ranked conference champs and, well, seemingly the group of 5, highest ranked group of 5 conference champ as well. So 5 highest ranked conference champs, those will be automatic bids into the playoff. They're not necessarily going to get the top 4 seats. So we found that out last week, and we anticipated that change when we were talking about the 12-team playoff prediction. That was already something that I had forecasted, that we were going to see that change. And so that's why I didn't stick to what we did in year 1 of the playoff, whatever. I think Sankey misspoke because everyone pointed out, wait a minute, the Big 12 and ACC didn't have coordinated press releases talking about that stuff, talking about straight seeding. Why did Sankey make that up? Why did he just throw that out there? Sankey should have said that the Big 12 and ACC had coordinated statements instead of coordinated press releases. He's absolutely right that the Big 12 and ACC did that. ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips told ESPN that the change to straight seeding was, quote, done in the best interest of the sport. It might not always benefit the ACC, but it was the right decision, and that's a responsibility that I take very seriously, close quote. Phillips also released a statement to CBS Sports that read, quote, today's decision was done in the best interest of the sport. It might not always benefit the ACC, but it was the right decision, and that's a responsibility that I take very seriously, close quote. Fire up the Pam meme of her saying, it's the same picture. Also, Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark weighed in on that CBS statement by adding that he hopes what's best for the sport, quote, continues to be the priority in any discussion going forward. I don't necessarily agree with everything Greg Sankey said on Monday night, and we'll get into that in a minute, but he had every right to clap back on that hot garbage. Hot garbage. The ACC and Big 12 commissioners are pandering. They're like the people who do charity work, but they just do the charity work so that they can post it to social media. Good on you. Good on you. At least you're doing charity work, whatever. What are your motives? Okay. The casual college football fan, or just the vast majority of the non-Big Ten and SEC fans, wants everything to be done, quote, for the good of the sport. And that's why people are always suggesting, why can't we just have a commissioner that acts in the best interests of the sport? Not going to happen. Not going to happen. You've heard me talk about this before. You don't need to hear me talk about it again. That is such a blatantly convenient lie from the ACC and the Big 12. And if you can't see right through it, Joel Klatt, that's on you. Okay? They're not basing their actions on what's in the best interest of the sport. Their actions conveniently benefit what the majority of the people would probably agree is for the best interests of the sport. That is a massive, massive difference. They're doing the exact same thing that Greg Sankey is doing, but without the leverage that 2 decades of data back up. The ACC and Big 12 are trying to do right by their presidents, athletic directors, and administrators that they represent in their respective conferences. They are not gauging the interest of the casual college football fan and going, hey, Ted and Winston-Salem, what do you think would make the sport better? We're going to default to you. We're going to listen to what you have to say. We got a suggestion box here that we're going to take from everyone, and all parties involved are going to be heard, and we're going to act what's in the best interest of what you think. They're not doing that. If that were the case, families wouldn't have to be shelling out several hundreds of dollars to watch their team play Mercer. If that were the case, teams would schedule the most entertaining games possible and never think about what it means for getting as many teams as possible a shot to play for a national title. But by presenting their side as doing what's best for the good of college football, they get to spin the narrative that they're the unselfish ones and the SEC and Big Ten are the greedy ones, when if the roles were reversed, the ACC and Big 12 would be doing the exact same thing right now. Let's not pretend like we're wired differently. Let's be blunt about it. Let's call it what it is. Everyone wants security. Athletic departments want financial guarantees from this $1.3 billion, that's billion with a B, $1.3 billion playoff pie. And they don't want year-to-year variance. They want everything locked in, because nothing is locked in right now. So the SEC and Big Ten are going, look, we've got 2 decades worth of data that show why we deserve these guarantees, especially with the programs that we've been able to add to our conferences during the 2020s. It is a power two. In the 21st century, there are 26 recognized national champions, according to the NCAA. How many of those 26 national titles that were won are now members of the Big Ten and SEC? I'd love to ask Jim Phillips that. I'd love to ask Brett Yormark that. It's 22. 22 of 26. That's 85% of the national title winners of the first quarter century of the 2000s are programs that are now either in the Big Ten or SEC. That's a lot. It's not just that the last 6 titles have been won by a Big Ten or SEC school, or that 9 of the 11 titles in the playoff era have been won by one of those 2 conferences. It's that current Big 12, as it is constructed after losing Oklahoma and Texas, it doesn't have a team who won a national title since 1990 Colorado. And that 1-7 playoff record exists, with the lone win being very quickly forgotten because 65-7, that happened. People were on the sideline eating wings in the fourth quarter, a certain team in red and black. You might have heard of that. It's also that the ACC is, as I bring up seemingly on every single podcast, still looking for its first New Year's Six / playoff victory of the 2020s. And you might say, Connor, that's too small of a sample size. This thing is cyclical. The ACC is also just looking to stay within single digits in one of those games. Hasn't been able to do that during the 2020s. As great as Clemson was during the 2010s, a program that went back and forth with Alabama, and it was this rivalry that took over the sport, and it felt like every single year just pencil in Clemson to play in a national championship. As great as Clemson was, still the only ACC team that's won a playoff game in these first 11 years. There's this resistance by the Big 12 and the ACC because they're still, at least what they believe, playing from the same deck as the SEC in the Big 10. And recruiting rankings, AP top 25 finishes, playoff results, NFL draft numbers, those all favor the SEC and the Big Ten. But according to the Big 12 and ACC, those don't tell the full story. I don't blame Brett Yormark and Jim Phillips for trying to keep it a power 4 and instead having this power 2, this recognized power 2. I don't blame them for standing up for themselves. This is unprecedented in so many ways, but it's also kind of not. If you're able to actually look back at what college football has become, the group of 5 has accepted this reality. You don't see the Sun Belt and Mountain West commissioners arguing that they need auto bids because they've had to acknowledge that there is a clear gap between themselves and the power conferences, and that's significant. The Big 12 and ACC are not ready to give in, perhaps because they don't feel that that gap is that wide. It'd be weird if they gave in and instead of releasing those statements or whatever you want to call them, Jim Phillips and Brett Yormark were like, you know what? Big 10, SEC, they have every right to puff their chests because you know what? Those guys, they've made every right move during the last 10 to 20 years, during this oh so pivotal era of college football. They have made the moves that we wish we made. And that's not to say we've made all bad moves, but they've made the best moves. And you know what? They deserve twice as many playoff bids as us. It'd be weird if they said that. They're never going to. The Big Ten and SEC are leveraging this by saying that they could make a ton of money in their own 34-team Super League. And because they know they're the best, they know that they would actually be recognized as having a true champion. And it would be one that would be respected. And that they don't need the Big 12 and ACC to have a competitive product that's recognized as the best, the premier in the sport. For the record, I don't want that scenario to play out. I don't. But I fully understand why Greg Sankey is playing that card and trying to use it to be able to get leverage. They want the guarantees in this new era. That's what all of this comes down to. They want subjectiveness off the table. That brings me to the other part of Sankey's comments, and you knew that we were going to get here, right? We had to get here, and they got everyone riled up. Sankey continued to complain about 9-3 SEC teams getting left out of the 12-team playoff. I've already said my piece on this over and over again, so I'm going to try not to repeat myself, okay? I know there's a lot of people that have probably already grown sick of hearing me talking about this, but because it resurfaced again, we do need to sort of, I don't want to say relitigate this, but we do need to address this and not just pretend that it doesn't exist, okay? You know how I feel about how silly it is that a 3-loss Alabama team claimed to be done dirty by the selection committee after losing to Vandy, getting blown out by Oklahoma. Hearing Kalen DeBoer talk about how he wonders how other teams would have fared with their schedule was just the ultimate eye roll. Plenty of other teams could have stayed competitive against Oklahoma and not lost to Vandy. And to hear a 3-loss Ole Miss team with a coach talk about their strength of schedule and how it wasn't valued, even though they had the loss to Kentucky on the resume, it's rich when you remember also that, as many people pointed out, Ari Wasserman's been a big advocate of this. The only reason that 9-3 SEC teams like Ole Miss and Alabama and South Carolina were even considered was because they were in the SEC. Sankey saying, quote, "It's clear not losing anymore is more important than playing quality opponents," was met with massive eye rolls because there are just so many SEC-specific examples that contradict that take. In the final playoff poll, 4 of the SEC's 9-3 teams were ranked, because remember, don't forget about Mizzou. Everybody always forgets about Mizzou. But they were all ranked ahead of the other 9-3 power conference teams that didn't play conference title games. That was a mouthful. Let me back up for a second here. Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina, Mizzou, they're all 9-3. They're all ranked ahead of every other 9-3 power conference team. So that doesn't really hold up to say like, they didn't value strength of schedule at all. Clearly, it was still valued, and historically, it's definitely been valued. You could say a lot of things about the selection committee. That's really not a knock as much against them when you remember that a year ago, 1-loss Alabama made the field over 0-loss Florida State. 7 years ago, 1-loss Bama made the field over 0-loss UCF, as it should have. The group of 5 had one team make the 4-team playoff, and a bunch of those teams, quote, didn't lose. Every year that the 4-team playoff existed, the selection committee put at least one SEC team into the field, while every other power conference had multiple years of getting excluded. So that doesn't really hold up. To sit here and go, well, strength of schedule is dead and the selection committee doesn't care about that anymore, should be met with, so what do you think then? 7-5, 8-4, That's definitely better than going 11-1. That stuff's maddening. That stuff I will always push back on Greg Sankey. Okay. But at the same time, I know exactly what Greg Sankey is doing by continuing to beat that drum. There's a reason that he didn't leave those discussions in December where they probably belonged, and honestly, where they probably should have never surfaced, but you get why they surface. Greg Sankey is trying to get to the subjectiveness of the college football playoff process out. He is trying to show SEC administrators and coaches, see, they robbed us. Let's take matters into our own hands and have these auto bids so that we don't have to worry about this in the same sort of way. The 4 auto bids for the SEC wouldn't totally eliminate the playoff. And by the way, 4 auto bids for the SEC and Big Ten. Whenever I say that for the SEC, know that I'm also talking about for the Big Ten as well. It wouldn't totally eliminate the playoff poll and the selection committee because remember, there would still be at-large bids that are up for grabs here, but it would largely diminish it if you're just taking the top 4 teams from your conference based on conference play. Adding that play-in scenario has also been discussed, doing the conference title game plus the 3 versus 6 matchup with the 4 versus 5 matchup, the 2 winners of those games earning the SEC's 2 other auto bids. I'm going to be honest, not crazy about that. Not crazy about that at all. Would diminish the regular season even more. Feels like such a money grab. And while I don't necessarily find myself agreeing with a lot of what Pat Forty has said lately, he wrote about how ridiculous it would have been to watch a team like Iowa play in one of these play-in games as the 6th seed last year and be 60 minutes away from getting into the playoff. And that's tough to stomach. And I have Iowa buddies that would absolutely love that, but they would also tell you that team did not deserve a play-in scenario. I mean, Iowa in 2015 was 12-0, and we were still debating nationally whether or not Iowa was worthy of being in a play-in scenario with a game against Michigan State in the Big Ten championship. I mean, times have changed drastically, but there are still some things that we're allowed to push back on, and that's one of them. But again, they're trying to make money. They're trying to make money. They're not acting for the good of the sport. They're trying to make money. Sankey is trying to give the SEC the best floor possible to make money at a time when it's never been more necessary to squeeze every last dollar out of your football program. I thought we'd have the House settlement announced by now. Thought we're going to have all that figured out, scholarship limitations, what it's going to look like for this sport, for that sport. It seems like the SEC is going all in. They're going to take this revenue sharing cap hit, whatever it's going to be, like $2.5 million. I can't remember the exact number of what it's going to be to have all these athletes on scholarship. But they're like, hey, we don't want to start eliminating sports. We're going to be willing to do these things. But there is still clearly with these discussions that sense of urgency. And that is fueling so much of this angst. The playoff format is going to determine whether the SEC stays at 8 conference games or goes to 9. By the way, the ACC is staying at 8 conference games. But remember, they're the ones that are prioritizing the good of the sport. Remember that. If the SEC gets those guarantees for 4 auto bids in a 16-team playoff, you'll see a 9-game conference schedule. They don't have to worry about that variance as much. They can get that extra money from ESPN. They can know, hey, we've got our 4 auto bids. We don't have to worry about cannibalizing each other. At the very least, we're going to have a quarter of this field. Let's get it and roll. And even in a bad year, who knows? Maybe we show up to the playoff and maybe we've got 3 teams in the Final Four or something like that. I don't think that would probably happen, but at least you can have that possibility on the table. If this is still the 5 highest ranked conference champs and 11 at-large bids, the SEC will stay at an 8-game conference schedule. And I say still because that seems to be the prevailing thought of what the majority of college football fans want if the playoff is expanded. The irony is that the growing sentiment out of SEC meetings is that SEC coaches are more in favor of the 5-11 model. You tap into that competitive side with them and they're like, wait a minute, won't this doesn't have to just be about a top 4 finish in the SEC? You mean to tell me that I could just get one of those 11 at large bursts? That's a lot. 11 at large berths. That's a ton, man. We can work with that. Sign me up, because if we get there, I know that we're going to have the depth, we're going to have the talent to be able to win on that stage. Everybody wants that ticket to get in. Sankey said they were able to have those in-depth conversations with the coaches about that 5-11 model. Ross Dellinger reported that the sentiment from SEC coaches was, why wouldn't that 5-11 model be fine? After all, look at the 11 years of the playoff. As he broke down, if we had the 16-team playoff with the 5-11 model, that is 5 highest-ranked conference champs and 11 at-large bids, the SEC would have had an average of 5 teams in the field. The Big Ten would have had an average of 5.3 teams in the field, slightly more. The 14-team model would have had an average of 4.7 SEC teams and 4.6 Big Ten teams in that 14-team field. Even last year, what was considered a down year for the SEC by only having 3 teams in the 12-team playoff, 16-team field would have had 6 SEC teams in. All those 9-3 teams that have been banging the drum that they got robbed all offseason, they would have been in. That just shows you, though, how messy all of this stuff still is at this critical point for the future of college athletics. Even the coaches and ADs within their own school, within their own conferences, are viewing this through a much different lens. I've always said that administrators are always going to be driven by what they'll get if they aren't great, as opposed to what they'll get if they are great. It's why they're administrators and not coaches. Those two people are wired differently. They have to be wired differently. And I understand that. The irony is also that if we somehow didn't get expansion in 2026, and we stayed at the 12-team playoff, the SEC and Big Ten are still going to have at least half the bids on a yearly basis. They had 7 of the 12 bids last year when everyone was saying that the SEC lacked elite contenders and the Big Ten had elite contenders but lacked the depth behind them. Do we realize that in the 11 years of the college football playoff, 2018 was the only time that the Big Ten and SEC didn't account for at least half the bids? That's it. But it's the official acknowledgement of that divide that has everyone up in arms, because hopium sells. The Big Ten and SEC no longer need hopium in the way that the Big 12 and ACC do. Hopium is good for the sport. I'll never argue with that. But you know what else would be for the good of the sport? If the Big 12 and ACC were trading blows with the Big Ten and SEC instead of being posted up in the corner just taking body shots. This is a war. This is absolutely a war. Many will spin this as a war about what's for the good of the sport, when in reality, it's about whose greed is going to win out. We got to this place because of greed, because of all the money-making opportunities, okay? I'm not going to necessarily push back on that. If we were still at a place where we were content with where college athletics were in 2007, then we wouldn't have all these games on TV and we wouldn't recognize the need for billion-dollar contracts and the desire to get to this place. We would still be living the same lives that we led 20 years ago. But opportunities were there. Administrators recognized that, and they took advantage of it. My best guess for how all of this shakes out, this divide, this anger that people have because they feel like the sport that they love is being taken away from them and is being held for the elites, and we're dividing classes in a way that we never have had to before. My guess with all of this is that we'll get to the 5-11 model. And probably in 2026, through the rest of the decade, until maybe the ACC breaks away and they're willing to have one of these schools pay the $75 million exit fee that starts, I believe, in 2030, I think that is, to go to another conference. Maybe until that happens, we're going to continue to kind of have the Big Ten and SEC dominate the college football playoff. It's going to feel like the Big Ten and SEC Invitational, and the ACC and Big 12 are going to feel more like mid-majors. And maybe starting in 2030, it'll get even more skewed. I don't know. Who am I to predict what 5 years from now is going to look like, when in 2020, I wouldn't have predicted that we were going to get to this exact same place, but there were certainly some signs that we were heading in this direction. That's what this sport has been, though. It's been a power two. And while we've been programmed to believe that it's cyclical, it stops being cyclical if the playing field is different from conference to conference. We've reached that place in ways that we never have before in this sport. If you want to ignore that and yell at a cloud about what's being done for the good of the sport, that's on you. All right, let's kick it to Michael Katz. Michael does such great work on the Ole Miss beat, so it was awesome to be able to catch up with him coming off of what I would call an intriguing season in Oxford. So, needed to be able to talk a lot of different Ole Miss storylines with him. So here is Michael Katz. I'm now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is Michael Katz. Michael, am I allowed to call you the professor, or is that just a Feinbaum thing?
I take compliments wherever I can get them these days. The only one that is off limits is doctor, because my family is actual doctors, and that's just stolen valor. And I don't have like an actual PhD or anything. So students will email me Dr. Katz, and I'll be like, I'm not going to correct them, but let's not do this anymore.
Dr. Katz is pretty cool, though.
It's flattering. But yeah, it's definitely stolen valor. My dad's a surgeon. Like I'm not going to fight him on that one.
You're in a crowded group of people, you and your dad, and somebody yells out Dr. Katz, and you both turn around. You can't do that.
Yeah, it's like that meme of like the person on the plane. It's like, is there a doctor on board? And it's like, oh well, your mathematics degree is sure going to help here. Like,
just leave it to email. Nothing wrong with that. Speaking of Feinbaum, I wanted to ask you about Lane. Seeing Lane's segment on Feinbaum at SEC spring meetings and seeing their back and forth was just a reminder of a few things. One, they need a show together. They definitely do. I know from conversations that I've had with Paul that he and Lane have just a really good relationship that might not always come across, but it definitely did in that 4-minute clip that they put out there. And they obviously have such a great rapport. Two is that Lane is somehow aging in reverse. And I would never tell this to his face, because the only time I've ever done that, he was like, why would you say that to another man? I was like, I don't know, man. I thought I was just giving you a compliment. But he doesn't come across as a coach that's on the edge after a disappointing season. How has he come across to you and to people that cover this on a daily basis after the last few months?
Yeah, I mean, to start with that segment, it had like big time like The Office vibes, where there were just like a lot of pauses, and like I was just waiting for like the pan out, or like just like the frame on Paul, who would be Jim, or like I was just like, this is just, they're perfect together. I love it. And they're both like open about how their relationship maybe got off to a rocky start. With Paul famously saying that Lane was the Miley Cyrus of college football, and then Lane got fired that next day from SC, and Lane jokingly always blames Paul for that. So it's a hilarious relationship. I think that last season, there was just so much promise, and this team was so good. This was the number 2 scoring defense in the country and the number 3 scoring offense, and you lost 3 games by 13 points. One of them where you didn't trail until the game was over, that LSU game. I mean, that's like surreal stuff that happened to them. I think it was disappointing. I know that this team had really high expectations when you bring back the sort of players they brought back, like Jackson Dart and all those guys, and you brought in the transfer portal class that was as good as we thought it was going to be. That's a team that I think, if they had made the playoff, I think to make a run, but they didn't. So it's always a big what if. But I think that as frustrating as that probably was, and as, I think from the outside perspective, no one's expecting this team to be a preseason top 5 team right now. That's just not, there's too many unknowns. You lose 18 starters, whatever it is, new quarterback. There's a lot of unknowns, but I think Lane is comfortable with what he's built, in the sense that they've got really high caliber players, whether it's through traditional recruiting, the transfer portal. They've got their coordinators still, and they've established a thing where it's, he's 5 years in, and it hasn't been a flash in the pan. Their worst season was, that 8-5 season. And then for most programs, for Ole Miss historically, that's a pretty good season. I think most Ole Miss fans would have taken that. I think this program's in a really good place. I think he's comfortable. We haven't gotten too in the weeds on is he staying or is he going conversations the last couple of years. 2022, we all remember the Auburn stuff. That was insane. We haven't really had a situation like that the last couple of years, and I think that has probably led to him being a little bit more comfortable too.
I think that there's probably only one other SEC team in the playoff era that you could say is the most disappointing in terms of the pieces that you had and what it ultimately produced. And it's 2023 LSU, just with how historically great that offense was. And we'll look back on that 10 years from now and we'll go, wait a minute, that team didn't even make the playoff. They didn't play for an SEC championship, no New Year's Six Bowl. Like what in the world happened? And that LSU team still, though, had way more holes than this past Ole Miss team. And that's kind of the crazy thing, is that people might forget how good this defense was. And historically speaking, the Ole Miss defenses have had a really low floor, even during the Kiffin era. And so you had that figured out with 5 guys getting drafted there. You had your first-round quarterback, something Lane has never had as a head coach, all these different things. And it still didn't even yield a 12-team playoff berth. Ole Miss fans, I think they're well within their right to feel like that will forever sting. Have you gotten that sense from them that they truly feel like that was a missed opportunity, even if the program is in a really good place right now?
100%. I mean, listen, you never know what the next years hold. You don't know how what sort of cards are going to be dealt. But this was a team that, listen, you went 11-2 the year before. You came back with a far better roster. There's no way that you lose more games than you did the year before, right? And you had an easier schedule by all, metrics and whatnot. But yeah, man, this college football is just, it's fickle. Everything that went right for them in 20, because they had a lot of they won all their close games in 23. The LSU game, the Auburn game, every break went their way that year. I mean, if you line up the 2023 Ole Miss team and 24 Ole Miss team, the 24 team wipes the field with them. But luck plays a factor, and it just didn't happen for them this past year. And I think that's probably what's frustrating too, is that everybody knows that the 2024 Ole Miss team, statistically, personnel-wise, I mean, look, you had the most draft picks in the common, 7-round draft era from this team. You had 2 first-rounders. And that, this is one of the best Ole Miss teams probably ever if you're looking at all those things, and it still got you to the Gator Bowl. And yeah, you won the Gator Bowl and you beat the hell out of poor Duke. And everybody came back for that game, and it was this great story. But I think there's a lot of what if, because again, we saw Ohio State was the coldest team in the country, and they got into the playoff and they just made their move. Ole Miss felt like a team that if they got in, they were going to be a problem. And I think that's probably it's going to haunt a lot of people.
What was your take on Lane wanting to send a message to the selection committee with the Gator Bowl against Duke?
Listen, I understand the frustration of just let us in and see what happens. But at the same time, don't lose to Kentucky, right? Don't lose to a team that, ended up winning 4 games? I think they were 4-8, something like that. Don't lose to, LSU. Yeah, that's a tough one. Baton Rouge is a tough place to play, but you led that game the entire game. And of course, the Florida debacle. That thing just fell apart like crazy. So, I think the big one is probably the Kentucky game. If they win that game, they make the playoff. It's for sure. They can lose those other 2, and no one cares. So I understand Lane's frustration in terms of, if you're trying to get the best teams in college football to play in the tournament, Ole Miss would be one of those teams. I don't think anybody can question, if you looked at them, they were one of the 12 best teams in the country. But did they deserve to be in? That's a different conversation, I think. And I think Lane, when everybody came back for that Gator Bowl, I mean, that game was just that, and that was a pretty decent. I know Duke was down some guys, and the quarterback had transferred like right before the bowl game. There was a lot of weird stuff going on there, but I mean, Ole Miss just wiped the floor with them. And I think it was just one of those things where it's like, see, look, if you let us in, look what we could have done. But at the same time, they had every opportunity to take care of it themselves and just let a couple slip away. Again, three losses by 13 points is pretty. I think that's going to eat away at a lot of those guys.
Is Austin Simmons the real deal?
I think he's legit. I mean, obviously he's replacing, arguably, he's one of the best quarterbacks in Ole Miss history, Jackson Dart. I mean, you can't question that. The first round pick, again, he's the first round quarterback for Ole Miss since Eli Manning. That's a long time ago. Jackson was probably just been born when Eli was doing that stuff. So it's pretty remarkable how good Jackson ended up being. And I know he was a USC recruit and he went there, but it feels like I know he transferred to Ole Miss, but it felt like he was an Ole Miss guy. Like it felt like he was like a Lane Kiffin recruit, right? He was there for 3 years. He became an Oxford legend. Everyone loved him here. It's going to be hard to replace that. Not just the production, but the sort of charismatic leadership and the way that he really kind of held this team together. Jackson was a really unique personality in that everybody on the team liked Jackson Dart. And that's not to say people don't like Austin Simmons or anything like that. I just don't know if we know that quite yet. I think they're different personalities. But I think that, Jackson everyone gravitated towards Jackson. And when you lose that, I think it's a lot to expect from a guy who's never started the game to just step into that same sort of role. That being said, he's done all the right things this offseason. He's graduated already, which is crazy. He's been there for 2 years. I mean, God. Dude, what are you going to do the next couple of years, man?
He's 19.
It's crazy. I remember it was crazy when he reclassified 2 years, I think it was. But graduating in 2 years is pretty remarkable as a Division I athlete, a high-level Division I athlete. Insane stuff. I think the talent's undeniable. You watch him throw a football, and it's just a little different. I know there's a lot of – he's left-handed. I think he's a little bit bigger, but – Tua gets brought up, right? Just in terms
he looks just like him, man.
Yeah,
he looks just like him. I know the height, but it's very weird.
No, the release, it just looks different when it comes out of their hands, right? But again, this is a guy. He's not playing baseball anymore. He's totally focused. I think this offseason was really big for him in terms of getting the locker room all behind him, just in terms of, like I said, when you lose a guy like Jackson, you got to kind of start from square one in terms of who are you looking to. And I think Austin's done all the right things. He's not as vocal as Jackson. It's something he said he's been working on. He's more of a lead by example guy. But he's really smart. I think people really like him. And again, the talent is just unbelievable. I know it's a small sample size, but what he did against Georgia in that game when Jackson got hurt was pretty remarkable. That game could have gotten completely out of hand if he doesn't do what he does on that touchdown drive. I think he's legit. To expect him to put up a 30 touchdown, 4,500 yard season, whatever Jackson did last year, is probably not fair. But I think when it's done, when his time is done at Ole Miss, I think he's got a chance to be drafted really, really high. The ceiling is unreal with him.
To recap, if he stays on the normal timeline of a high school college student, we're sitting here having this conversation in late May. He is still not enrolling in college yet. He is still not taking, well, even if he's an early enrollee, I guess you would have done that. But if he just decides, hey, I'm a regular college kid, I'm going to show up in August and get on campus, he would still be 2 months away from that. And he has already graduated college. That's going to be the Ryan Williams is 17 years old thing to bring up on a broadcast this year. And it's crazy because we do need to process just how remarkable in itself that really is.
No, and it's a credit to him too for, I think if you're a high level football player, it can probably be easy to put academics on the back burner, but this guy is taking more classes than anybody needs to take to get through graduation. Again, he graduated high school early. I don't even know if guy went to prom. I mean, it's crazy like how his timeline has just moved up so much, but he's taken it all in stride, and he doesn't look out of place. He holds himself, really, really well. He's mature. He sounds like a grown up when you talk to him, and he sounds like a guy that you want as sort of the face of your program and of your organization. And I think that's really big because you don't know what you're getting from most true sophomore or for redshirt sophomores, but redshirt freshmen now with sophomore. You don't have to worry about the maturity thing with him. He's going to pass all those tests easily. It was really funny though because you brought the Ryan Williams 17 thing. I think ESPN was tweeting about Austin Simmons graduating. I was like, oh no, they found it. Here we go. Here it comes.
That's coming to a Joe Test broadcast. And I mean, every single Joe Test broadcast, we're going to get that. It's going to be 11 o'clock local time for you guys. And you're going to have Joe Test shouting in your face about Austin Simmons already graduating college, when in reality, he should be a true freshman with his classes. And that's just not the way that this works. I love that. It's interesting because if he ends up being great, we'll look back on the Georgia possession, which was the biggest possession of Ole Miss's season. Let's call it what it is. And we'll say that's when we should have known. That's when we should have known this guy was going to be special, to have that kind of poise in that spot, to come into that game for an injured Jackson Dart and just calm everything down with that drive. It's monumental. If he doesn't end up being good, we'll look back on it as like a cautionary tale, much kind of like what Steve Angeli is at Notre Dame, where he has that huge drive against Penn State in the playoff game for Notre Dame. And then you're thinking, all right, that guy's going to be the starter. And then he ends up being a post-spring portal guy because he's not going to win that job. And it's interesting because this can go in a variety of ways. But, I do wonder, how much should we look into him passing up Walker Howard on the depth chart when that happened? Because I remember thinking even Ole Miss beat reporters were surprised to see that development.
I think that's the biggest thing is that, listen, Lane has not taken a ton of high school quarterbacks recently. It's been a lot of transfers. But he was the guy that they selected and had to move up a couple years. And, obviously he was a Florida commit before. He's the guy they chose to be eventually the successor. And, like you said, the Walker Howard stuff. Listen, I think for any of us who watched practice, it was clear Austin Simmons was better than Walker Howard. It was just are you going to have the cojones to actually put it on the depth chart, right? And tell this guy, hey, you're not the guy, hit the portal. Thanks for not, thanks, but no thanks. We appreciate your time here. I think it really says a lot about what they think of Austin, that even, listen, they've lost a bunch of quarterbacks this offseason, and the ones they've brought in, I don't think any reasonable person is like, ooh, are they bringing in competition for Austin Simmons? No, these are depth pieces. This is Austin Simmons' team. Even when Jackson was at Ole Miss, they brought in Spencer Sanders. They brought in legit competition. They're not doing that. This is Austin Simmons' team. I think they're really, really confident in him. If it doesn't work out in this, storybook way, so be it. But at the same time, I think it's really hard for me to see him not being at least a really, really good player. Because one, quarterbacks are always really good under Lane Kiffin and these offenses. And two, you just can't find that kind of talent and the mental processing and all the things that he brings to the table. It's rare. So, I do think the biggest thing was they didn't bring anybody in to challenge Austin Simmons. The challenge was Walker Howard, and Walker Howard, bye, man. I think he's at ULL now. And he might probably be a great player there. But it was very clear that everyone knew Austin Simmons was better and he was going to be the guy. And, Lane didn't play any games with this one.
Was it just that simple for why Walker Howard never became a thing at Ole Miss? Because I think when that transfer happened from LSU, everybody's like, whoa, that is really significant that he would make that move after his freshman year. Brian Kelly danced on him, and everybody was like, oh, this guy's going to be an LSU lifer. His grandpa's a quarterback, was an LSU quarterback. And it just never really materialized. And people will probably look back at this and wonder if Lane Kiffin's daughter and that relationship played a part in all of this, or if it's just Austin Simmons or what. But what did you just make of that whole situation and watching that guy go from he's next to he's gone and he never really had a chance?
Yeah, it is interesting because, again, like when we saw the transfer, the first thing that goes through your head is, okay, well, here's the next one. Like, here's whenever Jackson's done, like, here's the next star quarterback at Ole Miss. He had all the accolades coming in. He was a huge recruit. Like you said, he's royalty at LSU. The Brian Kelly dancing thing. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
It's playing in my head, and I wish it wasn't. I really do think it's as simple as Austin Simmons was just better. And it's nothing against Walker Howard. Again, I think Walker Howard could be a really good player. And if, in a different set of circumstances, he'd probably be a pretty solid SEC quarterback. But he was in a room that had Jackson Dart, a really established guy, and who wasn't going to lose the job. And, then you had, Austin Simmons, who it was pretty clear that, he was winning people over in the room. So, it is interesting though, because usually when you get that 4-star quarterback transfer, it's okay. Well, this one's pretty cut and dry. He's your next guy. But I do think it's a credit to Ole Miss though too of they aren't just like putting the guys in who had the highest stars or the biggest recruits. Like they're going to play the guy who's better and the best guy. And that's not always the way it works in college football. There's a lot of politics. There's a lot of doing things to make people happy, especially in the transfer portal era. Through it all, Lane has done a really good job of playing the guys who they thought were better, and I think that was the case with Austin here.
It's the same reason why I held out hope that Luke Altmaier could win the starting job over Jackson Dart, and then it just didn't necessarily materialize.
Well, he's a great player.
And now he's a great player. He's doing really good things. Maybe a preseason top 10 team, maybe a playoff team that he's going to lead at Illinois. The timing of these things is really hard to predict the way that it plays out. And you just have to make that evaluation at the time. We talked about this a lot on the pod during the season because my co-host Will loved Ulysses Bentley and was blown away that guy couldn't get on the field. Did you ever get an answer to this about why he just was in Lane's doghouse when it seemed like he would have a wide open opportunity, especially with how much they struggled to truly find that elite back?
I think the moment where we realized that this was just very weird was against Florida when Micah Davis, who was a transfer wide receiver from Air Force, was the starting running back in that game. And Bentley was returning kickoffs. He was there. And as we saw, J.J. Pegues was trying to pick up some short yardage, and it failed. If they have, a better running back situation, maybe that game goes a little bit differently. It really did bite them. I mean, this was by far the worst running team that Lane's had. So I think when you looked, I think Henry Parrish, that made sense. Henry was he was an Ole Miss guy before. He knows the offense. He was good. I mean, he's having a really good year. Before he wrecked his knee against, I think it was Arkansas. But it was always very weird because I think it was against LSU when he broke that 50-yard run and everyone's like, where's this guy been? And it just seemed like every time he got in, he did something good for the most part. But I guess to answer your question, we never really got a direct answer, which it's not surprising. I think we knew how that question was going to go and how that answer was going to go with Lane. He's not going to give too much on the details of those sorts of things. It is, but that's another one of the all-time what ifs too. I mean, I know that Ulysses Bentley didn't test great at the combine and all these things, but he was good. He was productive. He was productive at Ole Miss. He was productive at SMU. It's hard to argue that he wouldn't have been better than like a walk-on wide receiver who was playing running back. That's one of the big what ifs too. Is if they run the ball a little bit better, I think a couple of those games go a little bit different. But that's I will never forget that press conference when someone went really hard in on Lane and Lane did not bite. He was just someone brought up Pro Football Focus stats and he was not impressed.
The Ulysses Bentley book that comes out years from now. Why I never played. Player tribute story.
To read it as well, man. Trust me.
I'll write the foreword. I don't care. I'd be into that. I really would. Pete Golding proved a lot of people wrong this year, and he was an easy punching bag at Bama, understandably so. How has he become arguably Lane's best chance to keep Ole Miss's floor high with late season playoff buzz sort of on an annual basis?
One, I mean, he's an elite recruiter, and I think we've seen that. Ole Miss under Lane hasn't really had problems getting elite offensive weapons, but can you get those really good defensive players from the high school ranks and even from the portal? Pete Golding has added a credibility where, listen, if you come and play for Ole Miss, you can develop into a first-round pick. It just happened, and that's with transfers, that's with high school guys. I think that, yeah, he took a lot of shots when he was at Alabama, right or wrong. But I think that his ability to recruit, and I think that now that he's established what he wants to do and the way he wants to play, late in the season, like, you're going to have some grinded out games. It's going to be who can get off the field and who can make the defensive plays. And a few years ago, Ole Miss was not going to be that team. Remember Lane's first year, they gave up like 40 points a game.
It's bad.
It was atrocious. And now they gave up like 14 last year. I mean, it's pretty remarkable how this thing has turned. So I think he's done a great job. I think this is going to be an interesting year, though, too, to see, does it level back out to what it was the year before, where the defense was pretty good, but it was not a top 5 defense. You lose a lot of really, really impressive players from that defense. Can you do it again with different players, different pieces, and not skip a beat? I think we're going to learn a lot about Pete Golding. I think they're going to be really, really good again. I think they've recruited really well, and they've got a nice combination of portal and high schoolers. But to expect them to be a top 2 scoring defense, I don't know if that's fair. But he set the bar really high, and I think that really, if you look at Lane's career everywhere he's been, this is by far the best situation defensively he's ever had. Going back to Tennessee, going back to USC. I mean, they are a legit defensive program. Their defense was better than their offense most of the time last year. Their offense got stuck sometimes. It was the defense that really bailed them out. So Pete Golding's done a great job. He's also just like the coolest dude ever. He's awesome. I think recruits love him. He is no nonsense. He's great. Also, occasionally plays quarterback during their like little scrimmages, and he's got good footwork, man. I was shook when I saw him take off for the end zone. He looked like Vince Young in 2006.
I was thinking more like Barney Rubble.
The feet kind of they start, yeah. When he gets going, though, it was impressive.
That's true. This is true. I can ask you this question because I'm sure you've kind of pondered it as it relates to your career and what your future is ultimately going to look like, the situation that you're in right now. And, moving forward, I do think it is just a fascinating thing that all college football fans find themselves asking. But what does the rest of the decade look like for Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss?
Man, ain't that the question? In 2022, I thought this era was over with all the Auburn stuff. But I think that it's going to be completely like situational of like, if the right job opens, then who knows what happens, right? But at the same time, I don't think Lane doesn't want to leave. Like, Lane really likes it here, and he's established a program. I think he's comfortable in a small town. I think that kind of is good for his vibe, and his family's here. His son's going to Oxford High to play quarterback. I think it's if you had asked me a few years ago, I don't think there was any way in hell that Lane is here, through 2028 or 29, whatever it is. That's never been his thing, right? He's never stayed anywhere that long. But here he is. He's in the place he's been at the longest. He's comfortable here. He has free reign. And I think that's really big too, is he has an athletic director that, holds him accountable, but also lets him do what he needs to do to keep the program competitive when, listen, there are some things going against Ole Miss. They're never going to have the most NIL or the booster, all those sorts of things that Texas and Alabama and programs like that are going to have, but they spend on things they need to spend on, facilities, Pete Golding, all those sorts of things. So I think that situation is not something he takes for granted. And, I know they came up short last year, but Like, you could be a playoff team at Ole Miss. They should have been a playoff team at Ole Miss. A couple of things didn't go their way, but that was a playoff caliber team. So I think this idea that, I think maybe early in his career, there was a ceiling on like what you can do at Ole Miss, right? Of like, can you beat Georgia? Can you win those big games? And I know, they beat Georgia. I think that was a turning point for the program. It looked like it was going to be the turning point until a couple weeks later after the bye and the Florida game happened. But I think that these last couple of years have proven that he can win here. And would it be easier to win other places? Probably, but I think quality of life matters too. So I think he's happy here. He's genuinely comfortable. I think Ole Miss is really, really good for him, just in terms of he's embraced the community's embraced him, and that's not something he's always had at his other stops. And I think he's old enough to realize that the grass isn't always greener. Again, say a perfect job opens up, who knows what happens then. Maybe the old Lane comes back and he dashes, but I think he's not looking to leave, and I think that's really, really big. I think it would take something pretty tremendous for him to leave. He's in a good spot, and I think his quality of life is pretty solid, and he's got a hell of a program going right now too.
List is pretty short now. It's pretty short. I don't know how long it is. I always talk about it multiple times throughout the offseason, but you kind of look at the programs that would actually be a fit and worth it, like an Ohio State or something like that. And even that would have to take some bold move, which now that feels less and less likely with Ryan Day and his new contract. And the Florida State situation, who knows if that's what they'd be interested in. But the list it's dwindled every single year. And if you're an Ole Miss fan,
you got to be feeling great.
That's all you can hope for at this point, is to see that list continue to dwindle, to see all this turnover we've had in college football. And he's still there. That's good. That's positive.
100%. I mean, there have been opportunities. We know that whenever a coaching vacancy comes up, he's the first name on it. That's just the way it works. You know what you're getting into when you hire Lane Kiffin. Keith Carter knows that. He's always going to, Lane's always going to be one of those names that comes up. But there haven't really been any legitimate ones where you thought, okay, I think he would leave for this. Because, I don't think that those programs are really in better spots than what Ole Miss is right now. Ole Miss is in a really good spot. And, I know things can change really quickly in college football. Things can fall apart, things can get better. You never know what's going to happen. But I think in this era of college football, Lane is just so good for Ole Miss. And, Ole Miss is always a little bit of an underdog. And I think he enjoys sort of being, maybe not the hunter all the time. You would love to, of course, always be a top 5 team. That's just not always going to be the way it is at Ole Miss, but you can field top 5 teams, and I think that's really important. And but yeah, no, I mean, listen, when the A&M thing came and went, when the Auburn thing came and went,
Bama,
when the Bama thing happened, when Billy Napier they didn't fire Billy Napier, that was the one everybody was talking about, right? Was Florida. We know how much Lane loves the beach, though. As I learned, Gainesville is not very close to the water. I learned that. I drove there from Oxford because it's just kind of hard to fly into.
Yep.
I didn't see much water for the most part, with all due respect to Gainesville. But yeah, I mean that seemed like the most recent one. But Billy Napier keeps doing what he's doing. Like they're not going to make a move. So like you said, the list does keep getting smaller and smaller of the programs that he would be a fit at, and that he would want to leave for. And I think the more success he has at Ole Miss, the less likely it is that he would want to jump ship.
To be fair, and nice pun, jump ship. I like that. To be fair, I live in Orlando, and I think I've been to the beach every weekend, like all but one weekend this month. So
really?
You can get there.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay. So again, that was my first time in Florida. So how far is Orlando from Gainesville? And how far is
2 hours to Gainesville?
Okay, now
2 hours to Gainesville. To beach is like an hour and change.
Okay. So it's doable.
Yeah, I can do it.
I mean, we've got beautiful Lake Sardis here. The Mississippi lakes are beautiful this time of year.
Look, as long as you just give Lane a boat and give him some fishing, he's good. He's got that. He's got that. That's all that matters.
And no one was happier to be in Destin than Lane this past week. Come on, man.
That's why he was in such a good mood with Feinbaum. I mean, that's what this
shirt off.
It all circles back to that.
Come on. That's life.
Very true. Very true. Michael, Professor, appreciate the time. Looking forward to catching up in Atlanta in a few weeks.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you.
All right, let's close with some lad of the week. I'm going with Jace Laviolette, a guy that A&M fans will remember as a legend. And that would have been true if he didn't do what he did at the SEC tournament, which was one of the grittiest things you'll ever see any athlete do. Be hit by a pitch, by a fastball, break your hand, have surgery that night, and then play the next day. To do that is an absurd thing for what baseball demands, the mechanics of a swing. And I can't fathom the idea of swinging a bat as a left-handed hitter, breaking my left hand. So obviously, you're doing a lot of that work with the right hand, but still to come back and play the next day is one thing. You're fighting for your program. You're trying to get into the NCAA tournament. You're doing everything that you possibly can after it looks like your season was over, and he spent the rest of the Auburn game sidelined. Michael Early comes out and says, yeah, he's out for the rest of the SEC tournament. And then to go through all that and be like, no, just kidding, 3-hole the next day. And not only is he slotted into the 3-hole as the DH, but he's getting big time at bats, had a couple of RBIs. And even though A&M isn't able to win that game, man, you just tip your cap to that dude, because that's incredible. Absolutely incredible. I can't begin to imagine the pain tolerance that he had. Said he could grip the bat better than he thought he'd be able to. Grip it and rip it, I guess. But for a guy that obviously didn't have the year that he was hoping for, A&M as a whole did not have the year that it was hoping for in the first year of the post-Jim Schlossnagle era, and the way that all played out, I think you're obviously disappointed at the season that was. And who knows, he's probably signing up to be a millionaire very, very soon, and very likely going to be a first-round pick, even though the numbers just weren't necessarily there this year. But man, a new type of appreciation. I think A&M kind of needed something like that. Hasn't necessarily been the best, let's call it year plus, really, since Texas joined the SEC. I'm sorry, A&M fans. That was rude. That was rude. It was not directly just because of Texas joining the SEC. Not saying that, but just think about big time A&M athletics as a whole. We've talked ad nauseum about the opportunities that were there for the football program, seemingly on the cusp of maybe getting into the college football playoff, or maybe playing in an SEC championship, and basketball to have the season end the way that it did, and then watch Buzz Williams leave for the Maryland job. Softball, you get big time upset, and then baseball, just not the year that you were necessarily hoping for. But this is a guy that I think will be remembered very, very fondly in College Station for a long time, after it was looking like, is he going to enter the portal? I think A&M fans just assumed that after the way that it shook out last year, they would have so many of those guys gone and all their best players would be gone, and to have Laviolette come back and do the things that he was willing to do for that program. As he said, he would run through a wall for Michael Early, a fellow Indiana grad who was there at IU at the same time I was, actually, come to think of it. Just the type of stuff that you should never take for granted. I don't think A&M fans took that for granted. I think everybody across college athletics looked at what he did at the SEC tournament and said, all right, still some dudes that are willing to go out there and do it for the name on the front. As much as we talk about how selfish the NIL era has become with college athletes, we need stuff like that, man, because that is truly, truly inspiring. And I think Jace Laviolette will have a lasting legacy in College Station. All right. As I said at the top of the pod, remember, if you're getting in on the DFS action, Dabble is the place to do it. Use that promo code SDS2, $25 in bonus cash, no deposit required. Leave us a 5-star review. Please do that. Subscribe to our YouTube channel as well, Saturday Down South on YouTube, where you can watch every single episode of the Saturday Down South podcast. Follow us on Twitter at the SDS Pod, at Saturday Down South, at CJ O'Gara, at Go So Hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.